workshop on planned refugees. So worth just quickly going around the names, or do you all know each other? So I know names.
Okay, should we do it?
Yeah.
Jane Thomas. I live in Sheffield. I'm a former work colleague of Asad Rehman, being the team, and now I'm just doing lots of nonsense and campaigning on lots of climate stuff and anti-austerity stuff and general stuff.
Jane Willis from Bradford, from Verbal Justice Bradford and Friends of the Earth.
John Wood from Towie Country. But the accent is from Lancashire. And for those that don't know, Towie is the only way is Essex. Because all other people do.
I'm Chris Trumbull, I'm co-chair of the Sheffield Climate Alliance.
I'm Matthew, I work at Campaigns Against Arms Trade, and we've just had 2 weeks protesting against the Dicey Arms Fair in London, which is one of the world's biggest arms fair, and every day we focused on a different theme. And on the Friday last week we focused on the links between the refugee crisis and arms.
What a brilliant 2 weeks it was.
Yeah,
very
not much sleep.
My name is Charlotte Martin, I'm from Birmingham, just a Friends of the Earth member.
I'm Katie, I'm also from Birmingham, and I'm just here to learn.
Che Lee from Huddersfield Friends of the Earth.
I'm Peter Murray, I'm from the Green Party. In case you're curious about this, I'm filming this on the request of the organisers, and if you don't want to be in the film or to be filmed, just please let me know and I won't put you in it. Thank you.
I'm Hugh, I'm part of an organisation called Medicine, it's a student charity working on global health issues.
I'm David and I'm from Doncaster and I've done various things.
I'm Karen, I'm here on behalf of the Public and Social Services Trade Union. I've come from further south than Essex, I've come from Hampshire today.
We were just introducing ourselves.
I'm Heather Hunt, a member of Sheffield Climate Action, member of the Green Party.
Why don't you take this chair and I'll take this one. I always say that talking about refugees is probably the most thankless task and the most difficult issue to campaign on in the UK. Probably just ahead of climate change. So I always hats off to people who work around on refugee issues and climate issues. And of course, the refugee issues has dominated the media recently, and I thought it might be useful just firstly just take a step back and see where people are in terms of knowledge about refugees. We heard all these terms quite a lot, so I was wondering whether we talk about refugees, and of course people will think, well, I don't really know what a refugee is. And I thought it would be useful just to make sure that we all did know what a refugee was. So, do people know what a refugee is?
It's somebody who's leaving a situation for reasons of being, they're in fear, they're oppressed, they're fleeing for their lives, as opposed to a migrant. That's a completely different reason to leave a place.
So, you're right. A refugee is somebody who fears being persecuted and has left their country and unable to return safely to their country. What's the difference between...
Sorry, I just wanted to say something. I think one thing to bear in mind, well, I believe that the distinction between refugees and so-called economic migrants is not necessarily hard and fast. Thinking back, I used to work quite a lot with refugee students, and one of my students came from the Congo. He was a trained teacher. He came here because he couldn't make a living nobody could make a living in the Congo as a teacher. The teaching salary was too low. That economic situation was not the making of the people in the Congo. So people in his situation, they will be classified as economic migrants, but they're effectively forced out of the country.
Well, keep that thought in mind, we're going to come to that. Right. So what's the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker? Is that one?
Well, is it one will get harmed when they go home and one won't necessarily be harmed when they get home?
No.
Well, asylum seeker is simply somebody who's claiming
asylum.
status.
The status.
And you're right that migrant, at least in terms of the way that refugees are defined, is defined as somebody different. And it's defined as somebody who's moving from one country to another, and they're put usually to find work. But there are actually two different kinds of migrants as well. There are, legal migrants. People know an example of legal migrants.
Me when I work abroad.
Yeah, you when you work abroad, absolutely. And in Europe, the big legal migrant was the guest workers in Germany. They were where people were specifically brought over to do work for a fixed period of time without recourse to any sort of citizenship or nationality or anything like that. So there is another category of people out there. Do people know what an internally displaced person is?
Isn't that when the country is no longer is it to do about the viability of the state or something and they get moved, or is there something about?
Is it somebody who's had to flee their home and they're in their own country?
Absolutely, they've not crossed an international boundary. They've not crossed an international border.
And there's actually more internally displaced people in the world than refugees. If I'm
Do you know how many internally displaced people there are?
millions.
Let's give a figure. Ballpark figure. How many people? How many internally displaced people?
800 million.
Gosh, that's not that many.
50 million-ish? It wouldn't be as many.
Well, the UN figures, and this is the last time they did it, and of course it's always conservative figures from them. They said there's about 38.3 million internally displaced people. How many refugees do you think there are?
20 million?
19.5 million refugees, as the UN classifies refugees. How many asylum seekers do you think there are?
In the world?
Yeah. How many people do you think there are who've claimed asylum, who are claiming asylum?
300,000.
Couple of million.
Right? Eight people claiming asylum. 1.6 million people, and that's worldwide.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when people talk about the scale of migrants and refugees, you get a sense that, oh my God, it must be in such tens and hundreds of millions of people, but actually the number of people who are claiming asylum, who've claimed asylum, or in the process is very, very small. The UN says that there are about 59.5 forcibly displaced people. So all these categories put together, so internally displaced people and refugees and asylum seekers. Do people know where most internally displaced people are?
Africa.
Anyone know? In Africa?
South America.
Syria. 7.6 million people in Syria are internally displaced. Right? So there are people inside their own country who had to move because of conflict. Iraq has just under 4 million people who are internally displaced. And yes, Africa's there. The Congo is the big example, DR, Democratic Republic of Congo, about 2.8 million people. South Sudan with about 1.5 million people, and then it's traditionally been Afghanistan, which has also got just under about 1 million people being internally displaced in their country. In terms of refugees, where do you think the majority of refugees come from?
Syria.
About 1 in 4 refugees at the moment comes from Syria. Although there are a slightly separate category of about 5.1 million Palestinians who are classified as refugees or in refugee camps in 3-4 different countries. But where do you think the majority of refugees are in terms of developing countries?
Lebanon, Jordan,
Yeah, they are. So in total, 86% of all refugees are in developing countries. They're hosted by another developing country. And actually, 10 years ago, it was only 70%. So it's got worse and worse. More developing countries are having to take on the burden of refugees. And it's calculated, the UN calculates, about 42,000 people each day have to leave their home due to conflict. Right? Now, course, Britain has a long history of refugees. People know any of the refugees who've come here? Like what kind of, where people have come from?
Uganda.
Yeah,
In the 70s.
Uganda in the 70s. Anywhere else?
They weren't refugees.
refugees.
They were brought into work.
Conflict in Sheffield, we took quite a few refugees, didn't we,
Kosovo.
from Kosovo.
Kosovo.
So we had the Kosovo refugees.
Kosovan refugees. There was Somali refugees that came in the 90s. And then if you go back in history, you've got the big
Ireland.
The Vietnamese.
You have the
Huguenots. But you've got the Huguenots. I mean, I live in East London, and don't know if some of you have ever been on Brick Lane, and you go to Brick Lane Mosque, the big mosque in the centre. That used to be the Huguenot church when the Huguenots fled France as the Protestants, and then in the 19th century it was the synagogue for the Jewish community when they fled Poland and Russia. And now it's the mosque, and inside actually all of the original building is kept, so it's a very interesting sort of story of migration of migrants. But whilst there's been a history of migration and refugees, actually people only talked really about migrants in international law in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I thought it just useful to put this up. This is in Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was the first time that they actually codified and said we guarantee the right to seek and enjoy asylum in another country. But it wasn't until 1951 that actually anybody said, what does that actually mean? And in Article 1 of the 1951 Refugee Convention, it defines a refugee as an individual who is outside his or her country of nationality or habitual residence, who is unable or unwilling to return due to a well-founded fear of persecution based on his or her race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a particular social group. Sounds really, really impressive. But originally, that refugee convention limited refugees depending on where you were from. So, refugees, the 1951 Refugee Convention, only, for example, in Europe, accepted refugees who were from Europe. And it took till 1967 that the restriction on where you were from as a refugee was lifted. Now, it sounds really good, but the problem, of course, is the big weakness in that is it is up to each country to define what is a refugee. And so, in the UK, the Home Office defines and determines whether you are a refugee. And that's shaped by domestic politics and domestic issues, and that determines whether countries accept people as refugees or don't. So, of course, in the 1970s, people say, yes, we accepted Ugandan Asians who fled. There was certain moments through history where we have accepted refugees, and there are other moments when we've not accepted refugees. Now, the reason I thought that those were really useful to say is because actually in that there's nothing there that talks about climate refugees, right? And this has been a big issue, and there's been a lot of conversation for a long time about whether the Refugee Convention should include climate refugees or environmental refugees. So it's commonly said that climate refugee is somebody who leaves their home because of the effects of climate change. What's the difference between a climate refugee and an environmental refugee?
Well, if there'd been a tsunami, it would be a climate change.
Totally. Well, you're right. Environmental refugees, but people determine that as being because of natural disasters. A tsunami, a volcano, they'll say that's an environment. So they'll say climate refugees are a subset of an environmental refugee. Do you think there are more refugees fleeing because of political persecution and conflict, or environmental climate reasons?
A lot of it's intermingled.
Well, it is the
Yeah,
same.
you can't distinguish it.
It is intermingled, but in terms of the definitions, using the definition, the legal definition, we may intermingle, but in terms of the legal definition.
Well, if one falls from Syria, I suppose Well, the other 3 out of 4 on average. What was the main reasons for them as well?
Interestingly, the International Red Cross says that now more refugees are created because of environmental reasons than because of political persecution. But you're right, there is a lot of interlinkage, and we can talk about that. And the UNHCR did a study in 2009. It was the last time there was a study done, and it said that 36 million people had been displaced because of natural disasters. I mean, that was the last time. Since then, climate scientists have said everything. People have said by 2050 that will be 50 million, and lots of other studies have said by 2050 that will be 200 million people, and other people said by 2050, wait a minute, it's not going to be 200 million, we're going to be talking way more than the hundreds of millions of people that are out there. And so I want to maybe talk a little bit now about the issue around climate refugees, and how, you're right, it is all interlinked. Right? So there was a study done earlier this year. It's a bit of a scary study, and it was a study in the Science magazine, and it said that even if you limit warming to 2 degrees, which we all know 2 degrees is what the EU and has said is the level of warming that they should not breach. Of course, there's the caveats, only a 50-50 chance of reaching 2 degrees, and the fact that the majority of countries now in the world, including majority of movements, Friends of the Earth and others, all say that 2 degrees is too dangerous, and that all temperature level is dangerous. We have to stop a breach at 1.5, because the impacts that we're seeing are happening at a much faster, quicker level than anybody expected when they first did them. But this study talked about the 2 degrees and said, even if you limit it to 2 degrees, what we're going to see is a sea level rise of up to 20 feet. So that's now inevitable, because once you got to 2 degrees, we'll have gone over the tipping point. And the most conservative reading, which the IPCC tends to be the most conservative, talks about a rise of at least 39 inches. Now, when you talk about those figures, just even the most conservative, think about the big cities of the world. New York, Dhaka, Rio, so the people who live around them, potentially minimum 150 million people being affected. In the same report, it talked about that 17% of land of Bangladesh would be lost due to flooding because of climate change by 2050. Now, Dhaka has population, of course, in the surrounding areas of tens and tens of millions of people. So one flood in the scale of what happened in Katrina would displace 35 million people. And if you get the sense of that power, in Pakistan, where I'm originally from, we had one flood in 2012. One flood displaced 30 million people. 30 million people with one single flood. And you can, when you look at, for example, the small islands, Maldives, the highest point in the Maldives is 8 foot above the sea level.
I was just going to say, I mean, if you look at the bare figures of, you can analyse where we'll be underwater with 39 inches rise, can't you? But it's actually even more serious than that, because if you look at, for example, Typhoon Haiyan, the impact of that was the combination of previous sea level rise with specific local temporary climate conditions. So those two things, on top of the people who were affected by 39 inches, are another set of people who are going to be okay when things are all right, but local climate conditions combining with that rise will make things very difficult for them.
Absolutely. And Typhoon Haiyan, for example, remember the super typhoon that hit the Philippines, 10,000 people died as a result of that super typhoon. These super typhoons were once considered a once in a century incident. You'd have one every 100 years. Then it became once every decade you would see a super typhoon, and now the Philippines prepares for one super typhoon every single year. Right? And to put the scale of then what that means in, not just in terms of the loss of life, but in terms of the ability of poor countries, of developing countries, to be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change. There was one tropical storm, and it was just a tropical storm. It happened during the climate negotiations while I was in Bonn 2 weeks ago, it hit the island of Dominica. There's Tropical Storm Erica, and in terms of loss of life, it was small. It was 35 people there. Could be grateful there wasn't more. But that one, and it was a tropical storm, not even a super typhoon, set back development in the island of Dominica by 20 years. Right? So that's just one storm. And that, I think, is really the key issue for out there where this interlink comes from. So you see small islands already. Tuvalu has got an agreement with New Zealand that 11,600 of its citizens will be evacuated and resettled in New Zealand. The Maldives is making a plan now with India about where will its citizens go, and I think the reality is, in terms of the lack of action in tackling climate change, that most of the small islands are already accepting that there will be no small island states left, that they will have to relocate their people. Now, I think that those kind of relocations, of course, are absolutely outrageous, not just in terms of the loss of territory and people, culture and life and civilizations, etc. But they are probably the ones that the world will negotiate and deal with. But when you look at the impacts, for example, a continent like Africa, which heats up at 1 to 1.5 times the global average, they're talking about now that 75 to 250 million people will be impacted around water stress by the year 2020. Not way in the future. Within the next 4 years, between 75 to 250 million people will be impacted. And that in some of the countries, agricultural yield will drop by 50% by 2020. Now, if you think about the fact that, of course, we live in a very, very unequal world with deep inequality already, 35,000 people die each day from avoidable diseases. 1 billion people don't have access to fresh water. 3 billion people don't have access to clean energy or any form of energy. We know that those are huge inequalities already there. What climate change is doing, it's become the crisis of all crises. It exasperates every single crisis. So going back to Syria, of course, there's lots and lots of different reasons why the Syrian conflict is going on. But also, between 2006 and 2010, Syria suffered one of its deepest droughts. 70% of all livestock died in Syria. And you had a population which was primarily Sunni in the countryside, shifting to cities and towns where the Alawite minority and the government was in control. So exasperating the existing political, religious, all sorts of other tensions. Similar in Darfur. Darfur we always saw as an ethnic conflict between, when you look at what the causes, of course there are multiple causes, but an exasperating factor, of course, also was the issue around access to water and water stresses. And all the studies say now, in Somalia and Ethiopia and Eritrea, where the majority of people live on subsistence farming, all of those communities will be impacted. It's commonly said that one of the reasons why the Arab Spring took place is because of food prices tripled. And it's not rocket science. When you look at all historical sort of social upheavals, they all have a combination of why there is a social upheaval. But fundamentally, the way to drive people is hunger, isn't it? It's not a coincidence that whether you talk from the Bolsheviks to the Islamists, that on the street their slogans include bread. It always includes bread because it talks to people about something that they lack, which is that people who are on subsistence are pushed below subsistence to a point of crisis, and at that point of crisis, people will say, "Now I need political upheaval to be able to resolve my issue." And of course, we see that. And all the studies are saying now that Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Afghanistan are all going to be the countries most acceptable to these conflicts driven by environmental crises. And where are we seeing lots of conflicts? Well, we're seeing lots of conflicts in those particular, and it's not, of course, just going to be left to those those continents. I mean, we are when you look at the IPCC fifth assessment report, the climate scientists, what they wrote, they did three reports as part of this big summary report. They did one on what the science is, they did one what the impacts are going to be, and one on what should you be doing about it. And in the impacts one, they do what the global impacts, and then they do the impacts in each continent, and they break it down. And look at the European one. The European one is scary. And it talks about how, what large parts of southern Mediterranean and southern Europe will no longer be accessible. Agriculture will collapse there. People will be on the move internally within Europe, let alone from anywhere else around the world. And there's lots of figures on this. Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya, each year, all of them lose 386 square miles of productive land. So that's land that's been going for food to desertification. China loses about 1,500 square miles of land each year to the Gobi Desert expanding. These are all the impacts of climate change. Many, many different reasons, of course, are overconsumption of resources, the economic models that we use, our agricultural systems, etc. We're all exasperated and driven now by climate change. So the issue, I think, in terms of around climate change and refugees, and climate refugees, becomes much, much more important for us as a climate movement as well. That was all the misery bit of the thing, because I think there's also a very positive thing for me, I think, in terms of this issue, and maybe that's what we can spend some time talking about. Because for a long time, two things have happened within the climate movement. One, people thought we shouldn't talk about refugees because this is such a toxic issue in Britain that talking about refugees really makes people fear more refugees. Secondly, people said, trying to change that refugee convention, if you ever open that refugee convention to include environmental or climate refugees, governments are just going to weaken it. It will not be to strengthen it, it will be to weaken it. So we shouldn't do it. So there was a whole debate about legal protection. Should that be an issue? Should we be trying to push for legal protection? It'd be good to get your sense in terms of that. But also, I think there's some positive stories. Because I was in Germany and I saw a couple of weeks ago incredible people at the train stations walking around. And you think of the narrative and discourse that we've heard. Just phenomenal that people did respond. You can say, okay, did they respond fast enough, and what took the trigger? Is that something we as a movement should be doing now? Is actually talking much more explicitly about climate refugees in a way that we haven't done before? I'll stop talking now. I was wondering whether people had their own thoughts into. I'm sure you're all local campaigners on lots of different issues. So first of all, do you think we should be talking about climate refugees?
Well, I kind of think, is it going to need, like the Syrian boy in the newspaper, is it going to need a movement like that before the whole population gets on board with the idea of a climate refugee and actually changes the discourse and gets the empathy there for people displaced by climate change, rather than not really thinking about it? You need that sort of shock moment to change people's opinions.
I feel like there's definitely a racialized element, especially with the photo of the boy. The fact that he was lightly skinned, I think, played a massive part in, highlighting the issue. Like, cause we've seen loads of photos of like black people being drowned in the Mediterranean, and nobody was shocked by that. So yeah, there's also that element. In terms of the refugee definition, there's a huge debate in the literature about differentiating, making the difference between the refugee and the migrant, and a lot of people argue that the term refugee takes away a sense of agency from the person. So I don't know, putting the migrant on such a negative connotation. I don't know how that is. The fact that a person can choose to move, is that a bad thing itself? But yeah.
I think in terms of when we look at the Syria conflict recently, I think that the narrative, especially in the English media, sometimes is really quite horrible to hear. And I think making sure that people understand that there's these other pressures that exist for people, because a lot of people understand, they hear about ISIS, and so they think these are conflict-based refugees. how many people know that 70% of livestock's been lost in the past 4 years in Syria? I mean, facts like that, I think, seriously will change people's opinions and minds with regards to, you know, migration and refugees in general, because British media is not very nice sometimes, is it? I think these facts will really help.
There's